This slideshow will focus on Southern and Eastern Africa kind of as it is today. This is a large part of Africa, so there really are a lot of different types of people in this region of South and East Africa. And so there's a great diversity, many different ethnic groups. All right. Most of the people that live in Southern and Eastern Africa are indigenous people. Indigenous, you maybe have heard that word before, but maybe you don't know what it means. Okay, but indigenous are people that are native to the region. So those people started there and they've stayed there. So the indigenous people of America are the Native Americans, right? Okay, and so most of the people happen to be indigenous. Now, there are not just one group of indigenous people, there are hundreds of groups, and they have different languages and different religions and different cultures and different norms, things that they do, different ways of surviving. They're very different ethnic groups. Okay, and the problem is when the white colonizers came in and made borders, they didn't make borders based on ethnic groups, and so there are very few countries where the whole country is made up of a single ethnic group. And we talked about before in the history section that there's a lot of anger and animosity and hate between these ethnic groups because way back to slave trade, way back to the tribal time, they were fighting each other in wars as well as selling each other into the slave trade. Okay, and so there's a lot of leftover anger and animosity and ethnocentrism built into these different ethnic groups in South and East Africa. Now, the largest groups in some of these countries in South Africa are the Zulu and the Xhosa people. In Kenya, the largest native group, the largest indigenous group is Kikuyu. Okay, and then in Rwanda, the Hutus and the Tutsis are the two major native ethnic groups. Okay, many of these different ethnic groups used to live in different lifestyles. They used to do things differently. Some do things differently. Some of them herd cattle, so they're kind of out moving around, keeping their cows and goats and things like that safe. And others, they have these huge villages and rely on agriculture and farming and things like that. So again, I'm just trying to give you this idea that this area is just full of all different types of people. Now, most of this lifestyle change stuff has slowed down a little bit because most of the people live into cities as these countries have industrialized and there's factories and things like that. They're kind of turning into one people in culture, but still different ethnic groups, and still there's a lot of resentment that's left behind, which at times we're going to learn turns into violence. Because there's so many different people, there's so many different languages in this region, but many of them are based off of languages that are influenced by other people. Okay, and so the major indigenous language family is the Bantu language family. Because of the historic migrations, because of this one group of people moving through into most of South and East Africa, we're seeing that a lot of the languages has pieces of this Bantu language and is based off the old Bantu language. It's also based on who their colonizer was. So we saw many of those colonies were British colonies, and the British colonies, a lot of the people still speak English, sometimes as a second language, but English is a major language in there. In South Africa, where the Dutch came in and colonized the area, they speak Afrikaans. Afrikaans is derived in South Africa from the Dutch language. So it's this kind of spin off from the Dutch language. And then the other influence outside of the Europeans and the indigenous people is the Arab people that came in. And so in Sudan, you'll see one of the major languages is Arabic. All right. And then also Swahili is kind of one of these mixtures. So I'm talking about these are all the basis, but you might put one and the other together and make a language. And so they take these elements from the Bantu language mix it in with elements from the Arabic languages, and have created Swahili. Swahili is a very common language spoken in much of East Africa. The religions come from three of really the same type of influences, and we have those indigenous people. They bring in their own African indigenous religions that have been around for a really long time. And so you see a lot of that, and at least influence from many of these indigenous African religions, even mixed in with some of the more established religions that we've talked about before. Islam is very strong. You can see on the picture over here, the green nations in the northern region of Africa, you see a lot of Islam. And that comes again from that Arab influence, those Arab people that came in and started trading. And then the European influence comes in with Christianity, which you can see down here in the southern part in Ethiopia. It's very strong, and that again comes from that European influence. So these are really, Islam and Christianity are the major religions within Africa, but you can also see a good amount of indigenous religions. And if you look at particular parts of African Islamic and Christian faith, you can see some of the African traditional religions, some of their traditions coming into it. Take some time to write out your answer for checkpoint number 1. The question is, with all of the diversity that we see in these people, why do you think most people see all Africans as just Africans? So why do we not see this continent as different countries, different groups of people, different ethnicities? Why do we just say Africans are Africans? Why do people say that? Now, this is where those ethnic tensions we've been talking about and the ethnic conflicts, they kind of boil over and turn into violence in a few different countries. And it actually is happening still in many countries in Africa. But as you remember, hopefully, because I've said it in this slideshow and other ones, the Europeans have left these opposing ethnic groups that hate each other. They have these old problems from war and slavery. They left them together in the same country, competing for power, competing for resources, all of these different things. Okay? And so these ethnic groups have been competing, and that has led into some countries actual fights, actual wars. One of those countries is Sudan, and in Sudan, in the northern part, the Arab Muslims are, the major ethnic group. Okay, so this Arab influenced Muslim people. Whereas in the south part, they're not Muslim people. Okay, and so we have essentially this Muslim versus not Muslim fight going on. Okay, and the North has dominated throughout all of the history, but 2 times the South rebelled and fought back. Okay, and so that led to 2 different civil wars where millions of people died, and these civil wars last ended in 2005. So it was not that long ago that there was civil war in Sudan and people dying. Also, there's this another bloody conflict that happened in the Darfur region of Sudan, and you can see that on the bottom map down here. Okay, Darfur is in that kind of white area. And this happened between these black farmers, African farmers, and the Arab herders, and they were fighting over that precious resource that Sudan does not have much of because Uganda has built a big dam and stopped the river flow a little bit, and that's water. They don't have enough water, and so they're fighting over this water. And the herders, the Arab herders, because the Muslims have been in power, the North is dominated, they have the support of the government, and so they've come through with the government, with the army, and they've attacked the farmers, killing hundreds of thousands of these black farmers. This is seen as a genocide. A genocide is a big word. You probably have heard it before, but a genocide is an attempt to destroy a whole people, an entire ethnic group. Okay, the genocide that we talked about in Europe was the Holocaust, right? The attempt to destroy all Jewish people in the area. All right, that's what a genocide is. And so they're essentially these people from the north part of Sudan are trying to eliminate the black farmer, kill all of them. And so this was happening for quite some time in Darfur. It settled down a little bit, but in 2011, something changed, and South Sudan actually gained their independence from Sudan. And so the southern part of Sudan is now an independent nation. And so you can see that up on this top map. All right, instead of just Sudan, there are now two countries there, Sudan and South Sudan. There was another genocide in Rwanda. And Rwanda, there are again two different ethnic groups that do not like each other, the Hutu and the Tutsi. And so the Hutu are the people that have most of the people are Hutus, and it's kind of more the working class people, whereas the Tutsi people, there's many less of them, but they're the ruling class. They're kind of like the nobles. They're the fancier people. All right, and so they were kind of controlling the country when Belgium came in, and Belgium came in and colonized the area, colonized Rwanda. And the Belgians liked the Tutsi better, and so they kept them in charge. Okay, and so when Rwanda gained their independence, the Hutus started to get upset because the Tutsi were put in charge. And so the Tutsi were in charge of this large majority of Hutus, and the Hutus didn't like it, and so they got violent. All right, and so in 1994, for a few months at least, genocide erupted. Okay, the Hutus decided they were going to just go out and kill as many Tutsis as they possibly could. All right, there was nothing that could save you as a Tutsi, maybe if you had enough money to bribe your way out of it, but there was pretty much nothing else that could possibly save you. All right, so throughout these couple of months, about 1 million Tutsi people were killed. All right, so it was a huge amount. You can see pictures right up here of the killing fields. All right, and so the United Nations sent in troops to try and help out, but they were not effective because they were given orders not to engage the Hutus, not to fight the Hutus unless the Hutus attacked them first. And so they were trying not to fight. They were just trying to stand as a shield between the two people. But again, the people were pretty much integrated into the society, and it was hard for a few United Nations troops to stop this. And so they were really not effective. They did not help out very much, right? And so eventually the Tutsi people took control back, and the violence started to slow down. It still has not stopped. It's not perfect now. And you know, this is another example of this old ethnic problems causing new problems. And this is the story that we watch in class in the movie Hotel Rwanda. And so you can see this in a little more personal way when we're watching that movie. There are really two major different kinds of governments within South and East Africa, and those are democracy and dictatorships. Democracy, after apartheid, South Africa is a good example in the region of democracy. They have had fair and free elections, and those fair and free elections have created stable government. And the reason for this is because if you trust that your election is fair and you are allowed to have your vote, then you trust the government. You trust that the people have a say, right? There's not just one person completely in charge who's changing the votes every time. However, there's still some negatives. The legacy of apartheid does still exist. Okay, Black South Africans still do not get equal health care, equal employment opportunities, equal education. They do not get equality in a lot of different things, land ownership, none of these things. All right, and so they haven't reached that equality for the Black South Africans to the white South Africans. And it's really kind of similar to what's happening in the United States, except for they had a later start on it. And so it's a very difficult situation where these people were in power for so long, and it's hard for the people that were down below on the lower power to rise up and get that equality. The other type of government is dictatorships. We see those in Sudan and Zimbabwe. In Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, this top guy right here, okay, he rules by force. People are not allowed to participate in the government, even though they call themselves a republic. It is most certainly a dictatorship. And then The Zimbabwe as well has had one political party, just one party to choose from, one candidate every year for more than 28 years. So there's a constitution, it's set up. They want it to be free. The people want it to be free, but the president doesn't have any competition, and so he rules like a dictator. And it adds in corruption, where people are taking money and bribes and stuff like that, and also oppression, where you're oppressing people that are not like you. And this is leading to an economic collapse in Zimbabwe. And again, this often happens, okay, when a leader's in power for a really long time. And because of these issues, people are fleeing, millions of people are fleeing from Zimbabwe to South Africa to try to get to a better governmental place. Take some time to write out the answer to this final checkpoint. How are the European people responsible for the deaths that are occurring in many of these countries? So if we go back in history, how are the Europeans responsible for the deaths that are happening in these genocides? In these countries, there are still many, many problems that are happening today. One of the things is political violence. You see places like Somalia where there's not a real government that's set up, and so you have a lot of different small groups and trying to take power and trying to be in power. It's almost an anarchy, and so theft and violence are more common there than in a lot of other countries. We see in Somalia on the coast that piracy is a serious problem. People are going out in these boats and they are going out to these ships with huge loads of cargo worth millions and millions of dollars, and going out there with guns, taking over the ship and holding it for ransom until the company pays them to get back their crew members and their supplies and stuff like that. Okay, we also see the second dot here, poor transportation system, bad roads, not set up well with trains and things like that. I mean, you can see one of the major highways in the region is just in a lot of areas, it's very, very poor. The third one is low literacy rates because of bad education. You see not very many people can read compared to other countries. There are not very many resources in Ethiopia in particular. There's drought where it doesn't rain for long periods of time, and water is so important in the area because you need the water to survive, but you also need the water to create some resources to create food and things like that. Corruption is another problem because if the government is corrupt and they're not being fair with everybody, then businesses think, oh, that's an unreliable place. We can't go there. They're not going to be fair to us, maybe, so let's put our business somewhere else. So that hurts the economy as well. Again, a lack of education, especially for girls. Girls have way less opportunity for education than boys do in those countries. And then disease as well. AIDS is a huge, huge problem in most of Africa. All right, and so if we look at it, AIDS is a disease that is caused by the HIV virus. Okay, and in this region, many of these governments are too poor to treat the people. Many of these hospitals don't know how or are not very good at treating this, and so about 1.5 million people have died in the region per year due to the AIDS problem. So, as always, there's hope for the future. There's goals that they're trying to get through, and there are 3 major goals and ways that they're trying to help themselves out. They're trying to fight AIDS as well as they can, and the best way to fight it is to educate people about it so they understand what it is, they understand how it works, they understand how to be safe and stay away from it. And so in Uganda, for example, they've used texts, so text messages sent out to all the phones to educate people about AIDS. All right. The other thing that helps out this area is globalization. So the fact that I can order something from any country that I want as I sit here on my computer in America means they can make stuff in their factories there, and they can improve their economy by selling their goods to other places in the world quite easily. And then the last thing is foreign governments have come in, as well as NGOs, non-governmental organizations, to help to deal with the problems. For example, the one we've talked about before, the African Union. And what are they trying to do? What are these organizations trying to do? So again, it's outside of the individual governments. They're not in control of it, but they are trying to fix some of these environmental problems that are coming up with water, with the dams that they've stopped, the rivers that are causing problems, all these environmental problems. They're working to try to fix that. They also are working to try and help out with poverty, the extreme poverty where people can't even eat that a lot of people are living in the area, the disease such as AIDS and other diseases, conflict, these ethnic conflicts that we've seen happening in this region that we talked about on this slideshow. They're trying to stop that from happening any way that they can, and then also increasing educational opportunities, especially for girls and women. Now, again, this is a group of people working together outside of the government. So Africa is trying to, or a lot of these countries are trying to come together to work on these problems, even if the government is unwilling to do that.